QTIG consists of a number of Quakers concerned at the undermining of standards in our public life. Whether it's examples of individual malfeasance, assaults on our constitutional norms, or a systemic injustice such as the post office scandal, there's been a degradation in the quality of public life. Such incidents break the trust between governors and governed, and as such, they represent a fundamental attack on democracy itself, which relies on trust as the binding social glue. Collectively, we in QT do not support any one political party, but rather seek to encourage truthfulness in public discourse and to support those who make a stand for truth and integrity. We do this by recognising examples of integrity via letter writing and our award scheme, details of which can be found on our website, www.quakertruth.org. We very much want to take politics to the kinder ground Thomas Penny spoke of in his 2021 Swarthmore lecture, whilst we recognise that the route to kinder ground may itself be fraught and standing there may not always be comfortable. To this end, toward the end of last year, cooperating with Woodbrook as we are this evening, we brought politicians across parties to cross-party divisions. We had another session exploring how groups of citizens might build up a long-term relationship with their local MP. And in holding these sessions, we hope we are responding to the best of our Quaker tradition. But proud of this tradition as we are, we recognise that demanding those who act in this public sphere do so with truth and integrity in order to protect democracy is not a role for Quakers acting alone. All the major religions ask their followers to live lives of integrity, living out that truth of the insights they've been given. And given the scandals we've been experiencing over the last few years, the task of reorienting our politics is huge, and we are few. Therefore, we at QTIG joyfully respond to advice and query number 6. Do you work gladly with other religious groups in the pursuit of common goals, while remaining faithful to Quaker insights? Try to enter imaginatively into the life and witness of other communities of faith, creating together the bonds of friendship. It is our fervent hope at QTIG that in forming these bonds of friendship, we can act together. Earlier this year, in our 3rd seminar, we heard from a Buddhist and a member of the Baha'i faith about their call to truth and integrity. This evening, we have 2 speakers who between them have considerable experience both in working with other churches and faiths and working for the common good. Elaine Green and Peacey. Elaine is currently clerk of the Quaker Committee for Church and Interfaith Relations, a standing committee of Britain yearly meeting. Anne is chair of the National Justice and Peace Network, a grassroots body with Catholic roots, working with groups and individuals of all faiths and none who share its aims and values. And I must say, in the interests of full disclosure, QTIG has had the pleasure of close working with NJPN. Well, a warm welcome to you both, Elaine and Anne, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. As I said, I'll introduce each speaker beforehand. So turning to you, Elaine, you're currently clerk of the Quaker Committee for Church and Interfaith Relations, and you say of yourself, christened into the Church of England, I came under a strong Wesleyan chapel influence in my childhood. I was confirmed an Anglican, but in my teenage years I fell to leading towards a more simplistic form of Christian worship and social witness. At university, I fell out of love with the Church of England as my spiritual home, and turned to a friendly Benedictine priest to advise me what to do. He directed me towards the Quakers and over 40 years ago I became a committed member of this faith body. I've served in a number of national and international roles for BYM, and I'm currently the clerk of Quaker Committee for Christian and Interfaith Relations, one of the two BYM standing committees. So, Elaine, that's you, and you've entitled your talk, Working Together Through Faith.
Thank you very much, Gerald.
When you're ready to speak, we'll be ready to listen.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you all. And I'm always delighted to be given a soapbox to talk about the things that move me most. Let me start off indulging in a little bit of Quaker history and theology. Our religious movement emerged out of the tumult of the Civil War and the interregnum that had roots in the 16th century Reformation. In particular, Quaker theology inherited the basic Protestant doctrines of justification by faith alone, justification by grace alone through faith, and the concept of the priesthood of all believers. This Christian movement carried some Puritan characteristics and took its validation direct from scriptures. By the 18th century, for the generations that had not seen the expected second coming of Christ and who had survived the early religious suppressions of the failed republic, Quakerism shifted towards a more inward-looking sense of self as a faithful people of God, a peculiar people, holding themselves apart from the world for God. Committed to their Christian evangelical mission, this people adopted the systematic religious writings of Robert Barclay, writing in 1676, and Elizabeth Bathurst, 1679, as example guides to a faithful life experience, evidenced by testimony and discipline, to enable progression to personal salvation. Continuous revelation of God's truths, hidden beneath the veil that has been lifted by Christ, supported this spiritual journey. They might have referred to 2 Corinthians 4. Therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not, but have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. When we in the 21st century think of truth and integrity, we default to our own contemporary context of truth-telling, fact-checking, things like that. Yet our theological heritage offers us a mystical, transcendental definition that aligns with infinite wisdom, as in John 8:32, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. We know that in interfaith dialogue, language matters, and accommodating the other is an act of empathy and respect. Yet terminological differences can sometimes appear unbridgeable. When we hear scriptural references that don't speak to our condition, professed images of Christ as God the Son that do not equate to our concept of the light within, or supplicatory prayers that sound too simplistic and childlike, we zone out, away from what is untrue to our own faith experience. Conversely, though, as British Quakers, we may be ignorant of the assumptions and tropes attached to religious groups, which unconsciously we carry forward, and thus deny the truths of others. Such habits get in the way of building relationships, and we should abandon them in favour of active listening. Let's be honest, differences between Quaker and Quaker, Quaker and Christian, Christian and Christian, Muslim and Jew, remain susceptible to acts of unkindness and contempt. Whether Muslim or Quaker, Catholic or Jew, we have to make our own sense of the world around us and our own place in it through personal, cultural, and social experience, and how that speaks to us of the infinite wisdom. You may want to walk away from such interfaith exchanges in frustration and impatience. It is a landscape that can be hazardous, more difficult to navigate than you might suppose, when social action and public witness are also a reflection of the diverse understandings of truth. So what place has interfaith dialogue in the search for truth? Perhaps the first thing to recognise is that many people committed to the search for truth and integrity in public life are also likely to be people driven by an ethic that is grounded in their own spiritual or religious identity. And I include British humanism in that broad characterisation. It is a dimension that lends itself to ethical dialogue in pursuit of a higher common cause. But it carries risks of misunderstanding and hurt that need to be managed. We can choose to speak to people on public concerns we might assume hold the same views as we do, the same beliefs and priorities. But if we do that, we are likely to be mistaken in our assumptions. When we're not on the inside, we can't presume another's experience of the truth. We have to employ a language that is kind and generous towards expressed images and principles that are not our own and can find values or aspirations held in common. Our Quaker practice of right ordering requires us to listen to the ministry of each other and to test our leadings with one another in search for unity among us. This synodal way of working in community requires listening through the power of the Spirit within and being open to change. We aspire, so we say, to think it possible we may be mistaken. More than that, for effective collective action, we are seeking to build long-term, sustainable relationships, not just fair weather interactions of convenience. The run-up to the next general election is likely to be short. So my recommendation is that you separate out your short and long-term programmes for action in this space. In the short term, you can only build on the faith relationships that already exist in the field of social witness. These could include climate action groups, food banks, homelessness, or refugee projects. That sort of thing. You're all involved in those local initiatives. You may have in your locality effective interfaith groups through which you can raise issues around public accountability, trust, and integrity. I have to say, it helps, of course, if you can root your own concerns in your Quaker faith so as to convey an authenticity that draws the respect of others. Ask open questions of each other without assumption or bias, with an eye on the objective of open debate and exchange. If there is time, there may be an opportunity to organise together a faith-inspired hustings event around one or more public issue, such as climate or racial injustice, which, if well organised and chaired, can contribute to the quality of public debate in your own community. Alternatively, you may discuss together writing letters of petition or inquiry to your local electoral candidates and then discussing together any responses you receive. Remember that by letter writing from across religious boundaries, you can build a coherent interfaith voice that projects a strong profile in the public square. Over the longer term, it could be important to build personal relationships before corporate ones, and engage in social intercourse before matters of faith and ethics can be brought to the common table. For example, you could enjoy tea and cake together with Jews before you seek to enter their place of worship, that is, after all, likely to be gated and guarded for their collective safety. The pattern of churches together and interfaith forums across the country is varied and patchy, not only because of the rural versus urban landscape, but because of local histories of broken relationships and demographic change. You can't assume that even if such voluntary interfaith organisations do exist in your area, that they operate effectively for your purposes. So please investigate carefully and with an open mind about what exists and how it works. Local churches together groups may be engaged in worship and study together, social witness and action, or just in routine local structured meetings for business. Often it's a combination of these forms. Some groups welcome Quakers, while others do not. And it is well to know how you might address over the longer term any historic lack of this interaction. In short, then, we advance only in humility, in the knowledge that we, the peculiar people, do not have sole insight into God's truth, and we can learn from the truth as experienced by others. We don't have to fall over the religious words of others just because they don't coincide with our own. Young Muslims, Jews, Christians, and Buddhists are devout followers of their own calling, and if we wish to work with them, we must first respect their position and not allow it to block any potential dialogue. It is no longer our longing for salvation that urges us on to be objectionable, but more likely our arrogance, ignorance, and fear of the other. We can, however, choose to bear testimony to our own experience of truth and peace with courage, kindness, and generosity of spirit. Thank you, friends.
Now let's turn to Anne Peacey. Anne is currently, as I said, chair of the National and Justice Peace Network. And she says of herself, "I'm a Catholic by upbringing and now by choice and conviction. I came to justice and peace activism as an adult at quite a sterile point in my life, at the same time discovering a great interest in the scriptures. And I have to thank two wonderful Catholic priests who changed my life forever. I've been involved with the National Justice and Peace Network for many years, currently as chair of the network. My professional life has been in education, and I've been inspired by many colleagues, as well as the families who try so hard, with many difficulties, to nurture their children as well as they are able. I'm sure Anne will learn much of your current work as chair of NJPN as you speak to us, when you're ready, on finding truth and integrity together."
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share with you. If you can't hear me, just sort of wave madly or something, and I'll try and get a little bit more closer to the laptop. Thank you. As Jared said in his introduction, I will be speaking from a Catholic perspective, and I have to say with limited experience of Quaker work, Quaker worship and practice, and indeed of Quaker spirituality. So forgive me if I don't intend to appear insensitive or anything, but forgive me if it turns out like that. A number of the questions that Elaine has raised will overlap a little bit with what I'm going to say. But to start with, on reflecting on what drives me and helps me to make sense of my life, I would say that the social teaching of the Catholic Church, rooted in Scripture and lived out in the lives of those people who I admire and respect, and whose witness inspires me. My role models include many people of faith and goodwill, those who use their voices, including wonderful campaigning journalists at the moment who inspire me, who seek to find the truth and share it as freely and honestly as they're able. And today I just want to remember Frank Field, who was a campaigning MP for many years, and before that involved with the Child Poverty Action Group. So we pray that he and his family find peace. So thinking about truth and integrity in the public space, many would say we get the government we deserve. And I think there is truth in that. Our political leaders reflect the society in which they operate. Catholic social teaching demands that we engage in the political arena. In the light of Catholic social teaching, what do we find acceptable or not? How do we hold our elected representatives to account for what they say or what they do? How do they conduct themselves in the public arena? Tuning into Prime Minister's Question Time is as mind-blowing and depressing as watching the worst of slapstick comedy. Is this democracy in action? Is this the best we can do? And is this how we think the so-called Mother of Parliament should be conducting itself? How about a kinder, more respectful model of political engagement? I sometimes ask myself, how do MPs of faith manage in such a febrile setting? How do all people of faith and goodwill meet the challenges presented by being part of a society that appears to have little tolerance and respect for the opinions or even the lives of others? Where do the Nolan principles sit within our current political system? I was going to show a clip of the Nolan principle, but I'm not going to do that because I think most of you probably will know that these are the basis of the ethical standards expected of public office holders at whatever level, national and local. But the one that interests me very much is Principle 6. In the explanation about that, it says very simply, holders of public office should be truthful. That shouldn't need to be stated so bluntly, but unfortunately, in our present system, it seems very much that is necessary. Writing in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis suggests that what we need is a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. Elaine mentioned language, and I feel very strongly language matters, verbal and non-verbal. Words that are delivered in an extremely aggressive manner, half-truths proclaimed as fact. Words and attitudes that can belittle and destroy another human being. Narrative that feeds ignorance and prejudice. How many times do we hear this? People saying to us, this is what the people want, to justify unacceptable actions, and also further to justify their actions, saying, this is the will of the people. I ask myself, which people? Whose voices? The question for us is the loudest, most persistent voice that of the community of faiths working together. This could be a very powerful voice. Unfortunately, one outcome of such dysfunctional systems is apathy. How often do you hear, "I don't trust any of them. I'm not going to vote. They're all as bad as each other." So, have we become a society in which truth and integrity really matters? Elaine mentioned synodal listening. One of the key messages of the synod that's taking place in Rome at the moment, initiated by Pope Francis, this may also chime with Elaine, one of the key messages, respectful listening. And when we think of Benedictine spirituality, that speaks of listening with the ears of your heart, being open and willing to listen as much as to speak. Do we see this in our political debates and in the public space? We must acknowledge, however, that respecting the dignity of all people in creation is not exclusive to faith groups. Elaine mentioned the humanists, for example. There's also the Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are not faith-based. So what are the challenges for a network such as the National Justice and Peace Network in the search for truth and integrity in all areas of our daily lives, and how do we address this? As people of faith, we believe that we worship God in spirit and in truth. So how do we try to do that? I'm not going to give a history of NJPN, but just very briefly, the National Justice and Peace Network began in 1978 and seeks to encourage work for justice and peace by promoting communication and shared action between members, supporters, and partners. The network has evolved and changed, not always seamlessly, but over the years, and hopefully this will continue. Our world has and continues to change rapidly, and nothing remains as it was. We can't remain static. Different times, different challenges. In Gaudium et Spes, the document on the Church in the modern world, written at the end of the Second Vatican Council in 1965, all people of goodwill, not just Catholics, not just people of faith, but all people of goodwill, are urged to read the signs of the times, the joys, the hopes, the griefs, the anxieties of the people of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted. These are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. What about the signs of our time? Sadness, despair, injustice, inequality, poverty and indifference, self-interest, lack of compassion, aggression, and division. Very depressing, but as people of hope and people of faith, we are people of hope. So we have to believe and keep going. So how has NJPN changed over time in attempting to read the signs of our time? Gerald read out our visions. I'm not going to read that again. But our common humanity must be respected, and all must be able to contribute freely to the common good. So towards this end, NJPN identified 4 key areas to ensure a clearer focus for our campaigning. These are the movement of people, this horrific exodus of our times from all over the world, which breaks our hearts every time we turn the television on, just today even. The environment, peace and conflict, and domestic inequality, all interrelated. I have to say that working on these key issues has opened our eyes to the fact that no one faith tradition has the monopoly on working for the common good. Speaking personally, working together, having common purpose with those who worship in different traditions, has proved to be a fantastic learning experience. Relationships have developed, as well as respect for other faith traditions. For me, the wonderful thing is that far from watering down, that we hear from some doubters, my own faith has been greatly enhanced by the generous sharing in the faith journey of others. As Sir John Battle, a patron of NJPN, has said, we find allies in unexpected places. So whilst remaining true to our Catholic roots, focusing on working ecumenically has been a deliberate and exciting development. From working mostly within the Catholic constituency, we are now actively seeking new partnerships with those with common cause. The network has moved from closed meetings to representatives of Catholic dioceses and organisations to open meetings, welcoming those who share a deep commitment to our identified concerns. And I could mention many, but just a few: Fair Share, Christian Climate Action, the Interfaith Network of the UK, chaplains working with women in prison, the Reverend E. Pitt, the first Black Anglican priest, talking about the Windrush generation, people working in citizens with refugee forums throughout the country, locally and nationally, and online seminars in partnership with Christians Aware and the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and we hope to continue with those and develop those. In addition, the National Justice and Peace Network annual conference has provided opportunities through ecumenical partnerships, and we celebrate our partnerships. Over the past few years, we've partnered with Church Action on Poverty, Housing Justice, Positive Money, Christians Aware, Joint Public Issues Team, Arosha, Citizens UK, Christian CND, Green Christian, the Methodist Conference, and the Reverend Ruth G., formerly of the Methodist Council, is also a patron of NJPN, as well as Barbara, who is the CEO of Christians Aware. So how did we arrive at the point we now are? Our conference in 2021, remembering this was our first conference following the worst of the pandemic, focused on seeking signs of hope. The overall message being that hope is much more than wishful thinking. Andy Flanagan, the Executive Director of Christians in Politics, believes that all decisions are made by those who actually show up, striving to put kingdom before tribe and to disagree well. He urged us to show up, whether it's in local elections, local council, parish, whatever. Thus putting responsibility for what happens in the public and political arena firmly at our own doorsteps. In 2022, participants were challenged to become active campaigners for sustainability. Ecumenical partners included Christians Aware, Christian Climate Action, Green Christian, and Church Action on Poverty. We also hold interfaith hustings locally. We also sign up and do letter writing and sign letters from multi-faith organisations. This leads me to the developing partnership with Quaker Truth and Integrity Group. In November 2022, Jan and Peter, on behalf of the group, facilitated a meeting at the Catholic office in London. The theme was a better kind of politics, seeking kinder ground, where they shared their concerns about the lack of truth and integrity in the public space. The topic chimes so well with what we had heard at the two previous conferences and was relevant in the conference already being planned for July 2023. So the group was invited to lead a workshop with a view to being partners in the conference this coming July, the theme being just politics. The presence of both Gerald and Anne on the planning group has been a great blessing, and their enthusiasm and knowledge has energized us all. The discussions on liturgical celebrations have been open and respectful, and we do hope that we continue to build on this. NJPN is so grateful for their input. Whilst the theme is both necessary and challenging, I really hope that the weekend will also be an ecumenical celebration and a demonstration of how, though coming from different traditions, we can work well together and speak with a united voice in a concerted attempt to change the narrative and effect change. Just to give an example of the ecumenical flavour of our conference, keynote speakers include Bishop Julie, the Anglican Bishop of Chelmsford, Molly Scott Cato, former member of the European Parliament, British Green politician, economist and activist, Steve Whiting, who know, peace activist and former manager of Quaker Turning the Tide programme, Father Chris Hughes and Sarah Bryson, who will share and describe how they have used community organising in campaigns in Tyne and We're Citizens. Colette Joyce from the Westminster Justice and Peace Commission will facilitate a discussion between a group of young adults. Father Dominic Robinson and SJ will celebrate Massages, and Sir John Battle will chair the conference. The music will be facilitated by members of the lay Benedictine community, and there will be space for Quaker morning worship. So that gives a flavour of how we really are trying to work ecumenically to change the narrative and make a more just form of politics. So where do we go next? And what do I hope for? Speaking personally, my hope would be that within the Catholic community, the social teaching of the Catholic Church is increasingly recognised as a wonderful gift that engages everyone, that cannot be sidelined with the use of such phrases, oh, that's just political. That's not religion. I keep out of politics. My religion is my personal belief, and that's where it stops. But I feel that I wish to have a Christian community where every person feels that this is where the kingdom of justice, peace, and love is to be found. And for me, there is no other way. From the point of view of NJPN, I hope our conference will achieve its overall objective, which is learning to work together towards dialogue and respectful listening in political and social engagement, and work for good governance in all seats of power, local, national, and global. I hope that we'll come up with an action plan, bringing together all the strands emerging over the weekend, and that this will energise and enthuse all who are part of the gathering. And I hope very much that NJPN will continue working in partnership with the Quaker Truth and Integrity Group. We'll continue to pray that the Spirit moves where she will, and that we will continue to have courage and commitment to follow wherever that takes us, in working together with people of faith and goodwill towards dialogue and respectful listening in political and social engagement and good governance in all seats of power. If, from our own traditions, we could come together and raise our voices to people in position of power and say enough is enough, we must all work for a more honest and open society. If we did that, who knows what effect that could have. The ground on which each of us stands is indeed holy ground. And because we are believers, we could say, alongside Cardinal Peter Turkson whilst on a visit to London, not only am I my brother's and sister's keeper, I am my brother's brother and my sister's sister. We live in hope. One fact we do know is that we are already speaking partners for next year's conference, moving on from just politics to just peace.